So I'm going to jump right in, and my topic today is based on a new book that has just come out this week that I wrote called Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. Now, those of us who are Christians, I think, often like to blame atheists, agnostics, secularists as the prime movers of America's cultural collapse. And without question, they've certainly helped spur our descent into chaos, despair, and loneliness. But I think as Christians, we need to face an uncomfortable truth. Christians who aid and even encourage the rejection of historic Christian teachings are also, unfortunately, playing a key role in our culture's disintegration. And if more Christians, especially Christian leaders, had been faithful to biblical Christianity in our nation, we likely would not be in our current mess. And that means if we want things to improve, we need to look at ourselves and get our own house in order. Now, I don't level these charges lightly. Much of my life has been spent participating in Christian institutions and observing Christian leaders at all levels. In addition to what was just said, serving as a professor at Evangelical Christian University for more than a decade. I was ordained as an elder in 2 different Presbyterian denominations. I've served on the elder boards of 2 congregations. I've spent nearly 2 decades working full-time as an executive at Discovery Institute, which deals with science and faith issues, which has led me to consult and observe the actions of Christian leaders at all levels in our country. Tragically, I have come to the conclusion and seen Christian belief and practice undermined time and again, not by crusading atheists or secularists, but again, tragically, by Christian leaders. For anyone willing to look, the evidence is all around us. Andy Stanley is pastor of one of America's largest evangelical megachurches. He claims that the Bible is no longer defensible in the public square. The trustworthiness of the Bible is not defensible in culture where seconds count and emotions run high, he asserts. Accordingly, he urges Christians to stop citing the Bible as an authority, even in their own churches. He further urges Christians to unhitch their faith from the Old Testament, which he thinks would be better described as the obsolete Testament. Here in Texas, Baptist Mike Licona is one of America's most respected New Testament scholars. A professor at Houston Christian University, Licona is a rising star in the historically orthodox Evangelical Theological Society. Licona became known for defending the historicity of the resurrection and did great work on that. But in recent years, he's focused on transforming his fellow evangelicals' understanding of biblical truth. He now compares the Gospels to Hollywood movies that are based on true events, but use artistic license to change the facts, to better present the story they want to tell. He argues that gospel writers felt similarly free to alter facts, fabricate unhistorical stories, and even dramatically alter the context of things that Jesus said, and even dramatically change what Jesus said to make their theological points. For instance, Licona suggests that John took Matthew and Mark's account of Jesus saying on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and transformed it into this statement, "I thirst." Licona similarly claims that Jesus' words, "it is finished" in John 19:30 are not historical. He suggests they are a creative readaptation of Jesus saying, "Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit." Now, it's important to say that Licona is not just claiming that gospel writers didn't have tape recorders and so had to paraphrase what Jesus said. Everyone understands that. That's not controversial. But Licona goes way beyond this to assert that gospel writers radically refashioned what Jesus actually said. More broadly, he has raised questions about even whether the I am statements by Jesus reported by John are real. For example, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Licona suggests that they were John's, again, creative reinterpretations of what Jesus said. So how far did John go when restating Jesus' words, he asks? It's impossible to know. Licona calls his new view of the Bible flexible inerrancy. Whatever you call it, it's incompatible with the traditional evangelical view that the Bible is completely true in all it reports and affirms. But let's move to another sphere. Francis Collins is the nation's most prominent evangelical Christian scientist. He has spent his career, however, sadly, advancing policies incompatible with historic Christian morality and theology. Under his leadership, the National Institutes of Health spent millions of tax dollars to harvest body parts from late-term aborted babies for use in medical research. And it also, under his leadership, funded removing the breasts of girls as young as 13 to facilitate gender transitions. He also spearheaded efforts to denounce and marginalize Christians in the sciences who are skeptical of Darwinian evolution or who believe that living things show evidence of intelligent design. Another example, the late beloved Jimmy Carter was the nation's most notable born-again Christian politician during the past century. He spent the ending years of his life insisting that Jesus would approve of gay marriage, and these are actual quotes, "I think Jesus would encourage any love affair if it was honest and sincere and was not damaging to anyone else." Let's talk about some Christian celebrities. Hannah Brown is a self-identified evangelical Christian celebrity, not from Seattle, not from LA, but originally from Alabama. On a national reality TV show in 2019, she boasted of her sexual exploits in a one-night stand with one of the other contestants on the show, Bachelorette. When criticized, she responded, "It's my body, and I can do whatever. I sin daily, and Jesus still loves me." Another example, with the admirable goal of fighting racism, which that is an admirable goal. Some churches and their pastors are platforming speakers and spreading ideas that run counter to the gospel's message of salvation and human dignity for all. Speaking at a church in New York City, prominent anti-racist scholar Ibram Kendi denounced what he called savior theology. What's that? The idea that the job of the Christian is to go out and to save these individuals. Of course, it's God who will be saving it, but the idea that we're supposed to try to offer salvation to people who are doing all these evil, sinful things. He said that view, he tied it to racist ideas and racist theology. According to him, true salvation comes by recognizing that Jesus was a revolutionary, and the job of the Christian is to revolutionize society. And then finally, from my own tradition, we have the late Tim Keller, who was a widely beloved Presbyterian pastor and author. He blamed Christians for provoking their own persecution, predicting that 10 years from now, if you have evangelical convictions about sex and gender, you may not be able to work for a major university or for the government or for a big corporation. And he said this was because we brought it on ourselves because the Christian right was not loving and vilified gays and Democrats. So Christians were to blame for their own persecution. Now, I talk about these and many other examples in my book, but it's not just individual Christian leaders who are faltering, it's also some Christian institutions, especially Christian educational institutions. Fortunately, not the one you're going to, but for 12 years, I was a professor at Seattle Pacific University, a historically evangelical Christian institution, and I had a ringside seat for decisions that ultimately, I would argue, undermined its Christian identity, even though it still espouses, it self-identifies as an evangelical Christian institution even today. But the gap between the walk and the talk is huge. Ironically, these key decisions, in my view, were not made by theological liberals on campus. They were made by theologically orthodox board members who permitted the theological liberals to reshape the faculty, staff, and policies of the university. In 2021, my former university made national headlines when a majority of the faculty voted against the university's official statement supporting biblical marriage. The vote wasn't even close. 72% of faculty voted against biblical marriage. 72%. 7 in 10 faculty. Similar vote among the staff. How can you have a Christian institution when more than 7 in 10 of the faculty don't believe in biblical marriage? You don't, actually. So why are so many Christians, especially those in positions of leadership and influence in America, failing to uphold biblical teaching? Well, I think part of it is undoubtedly fear. If you stand up for biblical Christianity in today's culture, the consequences are pretty undeniable. You can lose friends or colleagues, you can lose your job, you can be targeted for discrimination or persecution. Many Christians stay silent out of self-preservation. But I think the problem actually goes much deeper. Many Christian leaders and lay people who fail to uphold the historic standards of our faith don't think they're motivated by fear. They don't believe they are compromising with the world in the views that they adopt. They sincerely believe that what they're doing is right. They're what I call in my book Stockholm Syndrome Christians. The Stockholm Syndrome takes its name from a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, back in the early 1970s. One morning, an escaped convict entered the bank with a submachine gun. For the next 131 hours, the convict, later joined by an accomplice, held 4 bank employees hostage. Over the course of the crisis, something strange happened. The hostages began to bond with the hostage takers and view the police and government as their enemies. Even when the criminals threatened violence, the hostages expressed gratitude to them. At one point, the main bank robber planned to shoot a hostage in the leg to show authorities he was serious. The hostage later recalled, "All that comes back to me now is how kind I thought he was for saying it was just my leg he would shoot." The term Stockholm Syndrome was later coined to describe situations where hostages end up identifying with their captors. Although it remains quite controversial as an actual psychological diagnosis, the label has since been used in pop culture as shorthand to describe victims who end up adopting the point of view of their victimizers. Now, how is this relevant to today's Christians? Well, most Christians in America grow up, I would argue, in cultural captivity. We're immersed in a culture hostile to genuine Christianity at home, school, college, and the workplace. This is especially true of those who go on to become pastors, professors, ministry leaders, journalists, politicians, or work in the entertainment industry. After they have been immersed for years in an elite culture that largely rejects Orthodox Christianity, they can easily start identifying more with those who hate Christianity than with those who embrace it. They can become Stockholm Syndrome Christians. I've seen this attitude again and again and again among church leaders, among Christian scientists and academics, among Christians in government, and among Christians in the media. Now, if you've already embraced Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, what I say will likely not persuade you to abandon it. But if you are one of the growing number of Christians of all ages, heartbroken by the shocking failures of Christian leaders and institutions at all levels, and you want to become part of the solution, I hope what I say might prove helpful. In my book, I try to do 3 things. First, in part 1, I document the symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. I show how a growing number of Christian leaders have been compromising traditional Christian teaching in 6 key areas: biblical authority, science, sex, race and poverty, and religious liberty. But although I do document what's happening, my book is not primarily about exposing things. It's primarily designed to promote solutions and change. So in the second section of my book, I delve into the root causes of Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. Because if we know those causes, there are things we can do to thwart Stockholm Syndrome Christianity from flourishing. In this part of my book, I look at how many evangelicals seek to please the wrong people, and how too many evangelicals, including board members and elders and Christian leaders, fail to uphold and hold unfaithful Christian leaders accountable, thereby facilitating the destruction of their own institutions. I also discuss how many evangelicals listen to the wrong voices for information and advice. Each of us tends to choose information sources we believe present an accurate picture of reality. What happens, though, when those information sources tell us that our Christian beliefs contradict reality? For example, what if your information sources tell you that it's impossible to live according to Christian sexual standards? or that same-sex orientation is absolutely unchangeable and that everyone has a right to fulfill their sexual desires no matter what they are. Or your information source tells you that science proves that the human species is the product of an undirected, unguided evolutionary process. If you keep experiencing those from the information sources that you're using to get information about the world, you are going to experience an increasing disconnect between biblical teachings and the real world. And in consequence, it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to hold on to the biblical teachings. So the sources from which you and I get our information about the world are critically important. If we spend our time listening to unreliable sources whose motives, assumptions, and claims undermine biblical teachings, we are preparing ourselves and our loved ones to become Stockholm Syndrome Christians, no matter what we may start out thinking. Many Christians who end up embracing the assumptions of the secular world start down that path when they are overly attracted to or influenced by information sources they think give them insight into reality, but which in fact lead them away from the truth. I've seen this happen with my Christian friends. I've seen it happen with the children of my Christian friends. They assume that their information sources are giving them an honest view of the world when in fact they are providing them with a highly slanted view. These Christians are being moved away from their Christian beliefs without even realizing it. In chapter 7 of my book, I go through various sources of information in our society and document how they can manipulate our view of the world. These include the traditional news media, social media, entertainment media, AI, celebrities, and search engines. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Today, if someone wants to find information on a topic, they often search using Google, by far the most dominant search engine. Searches using Google give the illusion of bringing up a cornucopia of different sources from different points of view. Many people probably assume that the sources they retrieve are the most popular or the most recent. In fact, Google searches are highly manipulated to screen out some sources, emphasize others. They highlight some candidates over others in politics, especially on polarized topics like abortion or gay rights. Google searches emphasize articles with certain points of view over others. Some sites offering information are blacklisted. Other sites are pushed. You are increasingly seeing a set of options that is curated to push you in a certain direction, but you aren't usually told about that curation process. In 2019, the Wall Street Journal did a detailed investigation of how Google increasingly manipulates search results. One part of their investigation looked at organic search results over a period of 17 days for the term abortion. Here's what they discovered. 39%, almost 40% of all research, all results on the first page had the host name PlannedParenthood.org. The site of Planned Parenthood, America's biggest abortion provider. Nearly 40% of the hits on the first page. Or try searching for Crisis Pregnancy Center on Google, as I did multiple times over a number of months in 2023, and I've kept redoing the search. The term Crisis Pregnancy Center generally refers to centers dedicated to helping women in a crisis pregnancy by providing counseling resources and options other than abortion. The top 3 results in my Google searches, however, were websites attacking crisis pregnancy centers. The top search result was especially misleading. It was neutrally labeled Crisis Pregnancy Center Map and Finder. But it linked to a website that disparages crisis pregnancy centers as places that are also known as fake women's health centers. It was, rather than linking to information about the people who actually do those centers to give information, it was highlighting and pushing the sites that attacked it, even those that were misleadingly labeled. When it comes to many important topics to Christians, Google searches are far from neutral or unbiased. The same is true of Wikipedia, the crowdsourced online encyclopedia that purports to cover issues neutrally, dispassionately, and accurately. It is used as a resource for facts, not just by students and ordinary people, but by journalists. And because it's free to use, many websites, as well as search engines, automatically pull from its content, sometimes without you even knowing that that's where it's coming from. Wikipedia started out with the vision of being scrupulously neutral in its presentation, but it hasn't been that way for a long time. Larry Sanger who co-founded Wikipedia and was responsible for its original vision of trying to provide neutral coverage, now is one of Wikipedia's sharpest critics. Wikipedia can be counted on to cover not just political figures, but political issues as well from a liberal left point of view, he says, pointing out the slanted coverage in Wikipedia of topics such as abortion, drug legalization, and LGBTQ issues. According to Sanger, the same slant that it experiences in politics dominates its coverage of Christianity. He points out that the article on Jesus simply asserts as an established truth that progressive scholars' study of the New Testament has yielded major uncertainty on the historical reliability of the Gospels. It asserts that as truth. It similarly asserts as a fact that the Gospels are not independent nor consistent records of Jesus' life. But as Sanger notes, these are partisan assertions, not neutral descriptions of what people believe. A lot of other scholars disagree with them, and Wikipedia doesn't neutrally describe that debate. It asserts one side as true. Christians who depend on Wikipedia are relying on an unreliable source that is likely to lead them down the path to Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. The latest development in online information sources, of course, is the creation of AI-driven services like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, and Gemini, Microsoft's Copilot. These services are hyped as all-knowing information systems that continually learn and synthesize huge amounts of data. Ask these services any question you want, and they will respond with seemingly personalized and authoritative answers. Now, there's no doubt that AI-generated information services are powerful tools, and they will be increasingly influential in the years to come. But they come with a significant downside. Marketed as if they are omniscient and accurate, in reality, they are only as good as the data fed into them and the programming used to process that data. If the data fed into these AI services is skewed, their answers will be no better. That's bad enough. But the situation is actually worse. The underlying programming of these systems can lead to the generation and dissemination of completely fictional statements. I discovered this firsthand when I experimented with Google's Bard, its forerunner of Gemini, in 2023. I asked it questions about the legality of teaching evidence for intelligent design in public school classrooms. Now, I had expected Bard to generate the kinds of inaccuracies and bias you'd find in Wikipedia. After all, it probably drew on Wikipedia as one of its main sources. What I didn't expect was that Bard would fabricate completely false information, but that's exactly what it did. And when I asked it to justify specific claims or cite its sources for this false information, Bard repeatedly referenced court rulings that didn't actually exist. It generated the names of purported legal cases and even cited the courts that purportedly issued the rulings, but these court cases and rulings never happened. It made it up. Let that sink in. And this is actually, problem is endemic. There's a whole literature on what's called hallucinations in AI. It's almost inevitable if you understand what's happening with it. But let this sink in. Bard provided fictional sources in support of false claims. Bard's fanciful answers made Wikipedia's biased entries appear to be paragons of accuracy. If you realize the implications of what I'm saying here, you ought to be concerned. Christians who aren't aware that AI-based information services can be even more biased and inaccurate than other sources are asking for trouble. The good news is that there are now many alternative options for getting information about our world. So there is no excuse for not using them. To see some examples, you don't even need to buy my book. You can go to the resources section of my website at stockholmsyndromechristianity.com, because I list a lot of resources in that section. Now, the third and final part of my book, Cures, suggests dozens of practical things you can do to challenge Stockholm Syndrome Christianity in your spheres of influence, whether it be with your family, your fellow students, your friends, your church, or at your Christian school or ministry. Here are 4 recommendations particularly relevant to those of you who are starting out on your journey. Number 1, recognize that preparing yourself to do battle later may be your most important task right now, preparing yourself to do battle later, not necessarily now. Throughout your life, you're going to have lots of things thrown at you by our anti-Christian culture outside the church and by Stockholm Syndrome Christianity within it. That's just the way life is. So get ready. Start thinking through culturally consequential topics now. Be proactive in developing a thoroughly Christian worldview. You can check out my book's website for ideas on where to start. Your most pressing task right now is becoming a well-grounded Christian, not saving others from Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. If you want to rescue other people from drowning, you first need to learn to swim yourself. Recommendation 2, prioritize friendships with spiritually mature Christians. Guess I need to pull up yes, okay. If your friends are primarily non-Christians or Stockholm Syndrome Christians, you're going to find yourself pulled increasingly in spiritually unhealthy directions. The same is true if you join a church dominated by those who have embraced Stockholm Syndrome Christianity. The Apostle Paul wisely warned, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. And do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. These warnings, of course, are especially important to heed when it comes to the people you date. If you want to stand for God in your future family, you need to be seeking a godly partner in marriage. 3, earnestly seek God's particular calling for your life. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Ephesians 2:10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. We are created to do works which God prepared beforehand for us to walk into. God already has plans for how you can stand for him in your home, your church, your work, and your community. Make it a priority to ask God daily how he wants you to make a difference today and in the years ahead. Trying to make an impact without seeking God's direction is a recipe for failure. Finally, if you want to make a difference standing for truth in your chosen fields of endeavor, pursue excellence. Never forget that it's going to take a lot of hard work. If you want people to listen to you, you will need to demonstrate that you are worth listening to by your actions, by how you live up to your responsibilities, by how you live. So commit yourself to pursuing excellence in your vocations at school, work, home, and church. As Paul says in Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Now, many Christians in America are reluctant to challenge Stockholm Syndrome Christians. Perhaps these faithful Christians don't want to be seen as divisive. Perhaps they're disturbed by the anger and lack of love they observe in some who claim to be fighting for truth. Those are legitimate concerns. But Christians who fail to provide a clear alternative to Stockholm Syndrome Christianity become part of the problem. When fellow Christians can't find good examples of faithful leaders, they become cynical and desperate, vulnerable to being manipulated by demagogues on both extremes of the social and political spectrum. If we want to prevent this, we need to show those around us that there is a better way. I also think we need to realize the danger of doing nothing. If a Christian leader or organization starts to depart from biblical truth, we might tell ourselves that the compromises aren't that serious yet. At least they haven't completely rejected the gospel. The problem is that once someone starts embracing the cultural assumptions of those who reject Christianity, they are on a path that doesn't have a logical stopping point. Consider one of the stories that I tell in my book about Pastor Ryan Meeks and Eastside Community Church, a large, hip evangelical church in the greater Seattle area. Meeks was featured a number of years ago in a Time magazine article, actually in 2015, as a new breed of evangelical pastor who embraced gay marriage. But if you search out Meeks today, a decade later, you won't find him at East Lake Community Church, or any Christian church for that matter. And if you search for East Lake Community Church, you will discover it no longer exists. If you went to Eastlake's website before the church shut down completely, you would have found out that the church occasionally posted videos but no longer held worship services. And there was no longer any mention of Jesus in their description of who they were. As they put it, we don't have a need for everyone to agree on a bunch of abstract dogmatic theories. They no longer focused on escaping to a renewed, peaceful world in some heavenly afterlife. Their goal was simply to create a better world here and now without Jesus. Eastlake's final mission sounds positively traditional compared to the current beliefs of their former pastor and his wife. The Meeks now live in Bend, Oregon, and here's what their website says about their new callings. Mostly, Ryan helps people who identify as non-religious or those who have left their childhood faith to cultivate a sacred way of living beyond the boundaries of any one tradition. But that's not all. A key part of their work is now helping people to prepare to trip out on psychedelic drugs. Ryan, Meeks, and Eastlake Community Church embody a key takeaway from my book. Things don't stay the same. Many Stockholm Syndrome Christians and their enablers downplay the compromises they are making to the Christian faith. Maybe they're stretching things a bit, but it's just a bit, and otherwise they insist they can still be faithful Christians. But Stockholm Syndrome Christianity is not a solid place to try to plant yourself. It's like the proverbial slippery slope. Once you adopt the operating assumptions of those who oppose Christ, you are likely to continue to slide down the slope along with the rest of culture. As the culture slides away from Christ and truth, so will you. Now, the good news is that the slide down the slope is not inevitable. And let me share one more story. It's a little-known story among particularly people outside Lutheran circles, and I myself am not a Lutheran. But in the 1970s, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the LCMS, found itself torn asunder when professors at its flagship seminary embraced theological liberalism. When church leaders tried to steer the seminary back toward orthodoxy, they experienced a furious backlash. Faculty and students revolted, staging protests and taking their case to the secular media. Denominational leaders were denounced as immoral, ungodly, legalist, and under the judgment of God. Astonishingly, despite the vilification and protest, LCMS leaders didn't back down. But the cost of faithfulness was high. In early 1974, after LCMS leaders made clear they wouldn't cave, 90% of their seminary's professors left along with most of their students. An exodus of 250 congregations from the denomination followed. Many observers thought LCMS leaders had killed their seminary and crippled their denomination. Fortunately, they were wrong. Within just a few years, the seminary rebuilt itself and thrived, and so did its denomination. Today, the LCMS remains the largest theologically conservative Lutheran denomination in the United States, with close to 2 million baptized members. Those who left, though, ended up supplying a glimpse of what the LCMS might have become had its leaders capitulated. The exiles eventually became part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which, despite its name, is anything but evangelical. According to a 2023 survey of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, 93% of their ministers support same-sex marriage, 84% opposed the overturning of Roe v. Wade, 78% opposed religious freedom protections for small business owners who may not want to be forced to service things like gay weddings. An earlier survey of lay leaders in that denomination showed that 76% agreed that no Christian group can legitimately claim its beliefs are more true than those held by any other Christian group. And half agreed that it's possible for a faithful follower of any religion to find the truth about God through that religion. The former members of the LCMS who joined the ELCA helped advance the cause of progressive theology within their new denomination. Our choice of whether to stand for truth can have tremendous consequences for ourselves, for our churches, for our fellow Christians, for our communities, for our nation. May God help us, help you, help me, help our friends choose wisely. Thank you.